being here. And I mean no disrespect to anyone when I single out one person in particular to thank for being here, and that is Maestro Charles Peckler, my dear friend and mentor, who, until his recent retirement for some 30 years, was the principal violist of the Chicago Symphony Orchestra. The way this will work is I'll give some comments on Bach generally, on each of the three pieces I'm playing, and there will be, after the second piece, the sonata, the G minor sonata, there will be an intermission that may not be noted on the program notes, but I need a break and you may not. It's a reasonably demanding program, not just for me, but for you too, because one has to pay attention, but it is rewarded. Bach is very, very good. As a matter of fact, it is about as controversial a statement to say Bach is the greatest musician that ever lived as it is to say Shakespeare is the greatest writer that ever lived. Somebody's going to push back and say, yeah, what about Milton? What about Dante? What about Sophocles? What about Homer, whoever he was? And the same with Bach, obviously. What about Beethoven? What about Mozart? What about Schubert? Yes, and we can have those discussions. All told, by and large, Bach reigns supreme like Shakespeare reigns supreme, and they share some odd similarities. One of the most attractive or fascinating features about Beethoven is his struggle. You feel the will to create, the will to build these vast architectural structures. Bach creates vast architectural structures, but there is no struggle. Bach's music can be about struggle. It can enact struggle. It can be gorgeous. It can be tragic. It can be unspeakably sad, heroic and everything. But you don't feel the author's, the composer's labor. Just like with Shakespeare, where writers for centuries now have marveled, how can he do these things with apparently no effort? There's, John Keats talked about Shakespeare's negative capability, by which he means anything the guy puts his mind to, he can do, and he himself seems to have this infinite flexibility. Bach has that same quality, infinite flexibility, such a total control of his subject matter that the author, the composer, never seems to appear. It's just the music. This gives Bach's music an astonishing naturalness. To me, playing Bach and listening to Bach is as easy as breathing. Like Shakespeare, Bach plays well on stage, otherwise he wouldn't be having the stature that he has today. Bach's music has, and I'll talk about this, some very complicated rules that are based on centuries of tradition behind them, and I don't really understand them very well. I have an inkling. Doesn't matter. Shakespeare has very complicated grammatical rules that he follows, and you see him on stage and it just clicks. Same with Bach. It comes across. That's part of his genius. Bach is at the heart of the canon of Western art music, what we call classical music. Bach, of course, was a person of the Baroque period. Nevertheless, we call it roughly classical music. Brahms was romantic, but we call him classical music. That's what I mean. It's to such an extent that music often seems, and I have more to say about that when I talk about the sonata, the second piece. Bach's music seems to open Western art music. It seems that that's where music starts. Most of us listen to music that goes no earlier than Bach. There are hundreds of years of music that predate Bach, and some of them are recorded. But most of us listen to Bach onward. Bach, Handel, Haydn, Mozart, Beethoven, Schubert, Schumann, Chopin, Brahms, and then Tchaikovsky, and then the opera composers and all that, right? That's the canon of Western music, but Bach is the foundation. It goes, this view that everything, music starts with Bach, is quite old. The pianist and conductor and good friend of Richard Wagner's, until Wagner ran away with his wife, which would have changed the friendship, Hans von Bülow said, he was probably out in the 1860s or 70s, he said that the well-tempered clavier, which is an important keyboard work by Bach, the well-tempered clavier is the Old Testament of music. You know, nobody goes really behind the book of Genesis, right? That's where it starts. So von Bülow, in the 1870s already, Bach was where everything starts. And to this day, that is more or less where things are. And that's how he is regarded. The foundation, the beginning point, the yardstick against which all other composers measure themselves. Schubert, just a few months before his tragically young death, was going to take some more composition lessons. Now Schubert, with the infinite creativity of his soul, nevertheless felt he wasn't a good enough composer. What he meant by that is that he wasn't well enough versed in the techniques of Bachian polyphony. And I'll tell you what that means too later. So Bach is, in many ways, where it all starts. As you can see from the program notes, he just on Wednesday turned 333. Well, he didn't quite make it. But he was 33 years old, 300 years ago. Life was very good. He had a big family. Unfortunately, just a few years later, his wife died, but he quickly got remarried and had more children. He was active in that department. Bach was a robust guy. He got in trouble, was it in his late teens, early 20s, because he got into a fist fight with another guy. Bach has a temper, and he has fun. He's a very theatrical person. He's a very theatrical composer. And this period that starts in 1718 and goes into the 1720s in Köthen, working at the court, was a particularly productive period for him, where he wrote a lot of secular, non-church related music. Among others, the 3 sonatas and partitas for violin, and the 6 suites, S-U-I-T-E-S, not S-W-E, the 6 suites for cello. They all come from that time. He probably started writing them just about right now, 300 years ago. They were published in the early 1720s. They form the heart, the core, the foundation of the repertoire of these 2 instruments, the cello and the violin. And one reason I'm putting on this recital today is that quite recently, about 2013, I started playing the viola. This viola, as a matter of fact, was made in 2014. And I had been a violinist still am, since age 5. And the 3 sonatas and partitas, the 6 pieces in all for the violin, are wonderful, but there's only 6. The pianists have 32 Beethoven sonatas and 24 Chopin etudes, and so it goes. And it's a universe what Bach wrote for the violin. But now that I play viola, I get 6 more. I get the 6 suites. So I have 3 sonatas for the violin, 3 partitas for the violin, and 6 suites for the cello, all of which I can play on the viola. Life is good. So one motivation behind this is to just celebrate the enhanced capability of this instrument. The violinists don't go near the cello suites, which makes sense. They're written in a somewhat different idiom than the one that works on the violin. And the cellists go mostly not near the violin sonatas and partitas because they don't work terribly well on the cello, but on the viola, I think they all work beautifully. Okay. Now. The first work we're going to play is the suite for cello, played on the viola, in D minor. A suite is a form that Bach used very, very much. It is a piece of music composed of a bunch of subunits that we call movements. And these movements are, in the suite, stylized dances. Allemande, courante, sarabande, gigue, those are the basic ones, and then he tends to put in some other ones, like minuet or bourrée or anglaise or whatever, what have you. And in the cello suites, in all 6 of the cello suites, Bach puts a prelude before the various dance movements. Now, they're not really dance movements. Bach just uses rhythms that are characteristic of these various dances as a conceptual framework for his pieces. And these dances were either very old-fashioned or already totally out of fashion in Bach's day. So people weren't going around in 1720 dancing sarabands. This was already stuff that was 100 or 200 years old. The saraband in particular has a strange history. It was a dance that was felt to be so lascivious that the Catholic Church prohibited it for a while. And it was fast-paced and so on. Bach's sarabands are uniformly slow and deep and reflective, and Bach does, as a matter of fact, some of his best work in these sarabands. So the Bach saraband has, in common with the dance saraband, that there's a 3-rhythm, a bum, 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 bum type rhythm, with an emphasis often on the second beat. But that's it. The Bach saraband is an art dance, not a dance. So the suite is a thoroughly secular, non-religious piece of music. By the way, the tradition in classical music not to clap between movements is relatively, given that Western art music is almost 1,000 years old, relatively new. It started in the late 19th, early 20th century. I happen to agree with it because Bach conceived of these suites as entire structures, of which the various movements, the prelude, allemande, and so on, are just building blocks. So it makes sense to follow that tradition. One brief request, and then I'm going to take D minor suite. I do everything. I hope I got my life insurance right there with the music, in case something goes wrong. I do everything here from memory. If you were to have the temptation to activate an electronic screen while I play, I would ask you to resist that temptation. I will invariably see the glow. It will distract me. And if I lose my thread and I get out, it's embarrassing for me and it's not fun for you to watch either. So it may happen anyway, but let's give me all the chances I have. Okay. So in the late 19th century, Hans von Bülow called Bach's Well-Tempered Clavier the Old Testament of music. That's true, but it is woefully incomplete, and it's totally ahistorical. Bach didn't see himself as the Old Testament of music, because he obviously wouldn't know what comes after him. That's one problem. The other problem is Bach has his stature in music today not just because he was a cutting-edge musician who launched all sorts of new ideas. He was that. He was even technologically cutting edge. He was a master organ builder and organ repairer, and he was not solely responsible, very, very majorly responsible for popularizing a system of tuning keyboard instruments, which turns out to be a terrible mathematical mess. I'm tempted to tell you why that is, but please not. If you run powers of 2 and powers of 3 over 2, they don't come out the right way, and that's what it's stuff. It's very difficult to correctly tune a keyboard instrument, and until the late 17th century, nobody had really figured out how to do it so that you can play in all keys, you know, in C and D and F sharp and A flat and all that. People played keyboard pieces mostly in friendly keys like C major and G major and so on. And the fancy keys like F sharp and C sharp were not playable because they sounded awful. And a number of people in the late 17th, early 18th century, just when Bach grew up and wrote, developed new ways of doing this, new ways of tuning instruments that unlocked the esoteric keys. Bach, I believe that's true, and Maurice, if I got that wrong, correct me. I think the F sharp major and C sharp major, probably in Fugue in the first volume of the Well-Tempered Clavier, are the first works ever to be written in those keys. The Well-Tempered Clavier is called Well-Tempered Clavier. Clavier means keyboard instrument, and well-tempered means, according to this new system of tuning keyboard instruments, Bach popularized it, and Bach was the first to write in some of the crazier keys. In fact, all keys on the instrument. That made the music of Mozart and Beethoven and Schubert and Brahms possible. Without those tuning systems, you can't write what Beethoven wrote. It cannot be done. So Bach was cutting edge in that way, in many others. But the thing that makes Bach so special, and that when you look at him as the Old Testament, you lose him, is that Bach was the last musician, the last important composer to truly have mastered the compositorial techniques of the past 300 or 400 years. After him, a totally new music comes that is homophonic, that means accompaniment and melody. The modern example of homophonic music is a guy singing and strumming chords on a guitar. The chords on the guitar are the accompaniment, the melody is the melody, that's it. starting with the early Renaissance, polyphonic music took off in the West. And really in the West, a lot of the most important work was done in the Netherlands. This work was done in writing masses for the church service. Polyphonic music means music with two or more melodies. I prefer to call them musical lines, it's a less loaded term. Two or more musical lines that complement each other, but that are not hierarchically organized. You can't say this is the melody and that is the accompaniment. They're both, in some ways, melody and accompaniment. Two or more, I say. Because, you know, the Renaissance was a time of intellectual ferment and experimentation, and composers went crazy with this stuff. They started writing, well, because of the way the choir is organized, soprano, alto, tenor, bass, so you have four-part settings, but not with accompaniment, or with four independent lines that work according to complicated laws, so it sounds good. And then people really got out of hand. Josquin wrote a motet, I think, in canon form for a 15-part canon. 15 independent lines. Listen to this, it's pretty, but you can't appreciate what you're hearing. You have to look at it on paper, because it's too complicated. The second line is the first line played backwards at half tempo, and the third line is, it's all this game playing. It's fantastically complicated stuff. I don't know how they could do it without a computer, but there you are. A lot of this music is truly great. A lot of it, as I just said, doesn't really open up to the ear. It opens up to the ear and the eye. You have to look at it to understand what is going on. Thomas Tallis wrote a piece called Sperminarium for 60 independent lines. You see, things spun a little out of control, and then you got the Reformation, and then the Reformers, the Protestants, the Lutherans.